The Last of Us, The Walking Dead, don't make me laugh. I'm a man of culture. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and I'm a Doctor Who fan, but confession time, I have not seen The Seeds of Doom. Yes, the Season 13 story, which is coming out in a collection box set later this year. I haven't seen it. I know it's a fan favourite story. I know it's meant to be like one of the peaks of the era, but I've not seen the story that features the Krynoids. But I decided, just for fun, I'm going to dive into the start of this new spin-off range from Big Finish Productions set in the Doctor Who universe for an adult audience, because this release contains adult material and may not be suitable for younger listeners. This is a badge of honour, and this is a series that's the brainchild of Jonathan S. Powell and John Ainsworth, with a story also written by Jonathan Morris. So there's a lot of Johns involved, and it's essentially meant to be a pilot box set for a new Doctor Who series that is taking cues from The Last of Us and The Walking Dead. Earlier this year, Big Finish released the brilliant Zygon Century, which I really enjoyed, and I think that that's basically the template for Doctor Who spin-offs that they should be following in the TV series. So let's see if Planet Krynoid Volume 1 Nightfall is able to basically walk in the slipstream of Zygon Century. Even though Zygon Century is a much bigger story in terms of a time span, which takes place over the course of, well, a century, whereas Nightfall takes place over the course of just a couple of days, as this human colony in the far future get besieged by Krynoids. And it takes place on the human colony of Sunlight. Basically, in the far future, humanity found this ice world called Verdana, and they used solar satellites to thaw it out to make it habitable for humans. And because of this approach of geoengineering, they called it Sunlight. And this story is incredibly political. Sunlight is essentially Space Dubai, where you have this incredibly rich upper class of people. They live in an atrium, and then you have all of the workers, the people who actually make Sunlight function. They live on the fringes of society in slums. And this three-part story essentially follows the downfall of Sunlight. We've got episode 1, Sunlight, by Jonathan Morris, episode 2, Sunset, by Jonathan S. Powell, and episode 3, Darkness, by Chris Chapman. And even though we have Rhys Shearsmith and Paul McGann on the cover, it's a little bit misleading. This is definitely an ensemble cast, and Paul McGann only features in one episode. So if you're here for an 8th Doctor Krynoid adventure, you're not really going to get that here. But what you are going to get is an effective pilot, an effective opener for this Planet Krynoid series, which has Governor Holden, played by Rhys Shearsmith. Holden is a former actor who has basically been made the front for the people. However, the big company behind Sunlight, Chemovox, they're the ones who are really in charge. The head of Chemovox being Carl Magnus, played by Joseph Eyre. We have Engineer Maggie, played by Sarah Whitehouse, who, along with her colleague, discover these 2 eggs on one of the satellites, which is geoforming this planet. The satellite has malfunctioned, which is causing the colony to freeze up again, but they go up there to fix the satellite and they find 2 Krynoid eggs embedded in the satellite. And just like the opening of Ridley Scott's Alien, it all goes very wrong very quickly. And over 3 hours, we see the downfall of Sunlight because of these 2 eggs. But the colony is also hiding a secret from 100 years ago, and that's where the 8th Doctor steps in.
Alright, Maggie. You're clear of infection and free to leave.
What about Piotr?
Where am I?
Piotr!
Where am I?
It's me, it's Maggie. You're back on Sunlight in atrium quarantine. You're safe.
Quarantine?
Something happened to you in space, Engineer Azaroff. You came into contact with an alien organism.
What? I did what?
What's the last thing you remember?
I was inside the satellite welding the last of the bridging cables, and then what happened?
The pods you found. It opened up and released something.
Something so powerful it smashed through the visor of your spacesuit.
But then, how can I still be here?
Whatever was in that pod released some sort of chute or tricon, injecting its own cells into your body.
So, I'm infected?
For want of a better term. But as far as I can tell, it's not a virus or bacteria. Your bloodstream is full of schizophytes.
Schizophytes?
A rudimentary form of plant cell.
Episode Sunlight is a really effective pilot episode. Like I said, it's kind of like Ridley Scott's Alien. And you get these two really effective strands in the first episode. Firstly, you're following Maggie, who goes back to the slums with her family, and she's got her own drama going on. And then you've got this other strand in the Atrium where you've got Governor Hoden, who's wanting to use the Krynoid egg in order to cure his wife of a terminal illness. Because as is often the case with stories like this, the path to the apocalypse is laid with good intentions. And as somebody who, like I said, I have not watched Seeds of Doom, I don't know if there's a bunch of references or callbacks, or if it fits perfectly with the Krynoid continuity that we saw in that story. Like I said, I'm a fake fan, but there's some really great body horror elements on how the infection is spreading, how the infected people act, very similar to what we saw with the fungus in The Last of Us. But Planet Krynoid effectively sets the stage with a really strong ensemble cast of characters. The governor who knows more than he lets on, the CEO who's just a bastard, the working class family, the group of doctors and scientists who are trying to essentially cure the Krynoid infection, and then they go to investigate the colony's origins from 100 years ago and uncover a big conspiracy. Out of all of the cast members, I think it's Lucy Heath as Dr. Faith Costello who gets the most in terms of just pure range of her character. I think that she really did a great job at standing out in what's already a pretty stacked ensemble cast. I thought she was terrific. And shout out as well to Reiki Iola, who plays Hoden's wife Clarissa, who's doing this really fun like Valley Girl southern drawl, and she's deliberately infected, and then even though she's a vegetarian, she's just screaming, "Meat, I want meat," and it's really entertaining but also a little bit freaky. But the main theme that's underlining Planet Krynoid is just this divided world through class. And the way that this box set presents it isn't entirely original. We've seen it in films like Elysium, but I did really appreciate the creative team just throwing all subtlety out of the window in part 2 and just going, yes, eat the rich, quite literally. I will say, however, that part 2 is, for my money, the weakest story, and that is the one with Paul McGann in it. Now, the Eighth Doctor is, of course, a welcome presence in any story, but I think he's mainly here just so that this ensemble cast have a name for the threat, because he's the first one to introduce Krynoid into the lexicon of the box set. He is essentially the one to do all of the exposition dumping, and it feels like that's the beginning and end of his role. He doesn't really have that much to do in terms of a character presence, and I think the box set kind of senses that he shouldn't really be there, which is why he essentially leaves the story early before it's properly resolved in a way that I personally found to be quite out of character.
But we can't wait here long. Our friend is not going to give up the chase.
Where do you suggest we go?
I've got some equipment stationed somewhere in this complex. I need to find it before I find out too much about what happened here a century ago.
You mean you don't know what happened?
Not after I was frozen, no. I would have thought that was obvious.
You're not one of the first colonists, are you?
What makes you say that?
Other than computer not recognizing you, you're too brash, honest, kind, actually. You don't have the air of a colonist.
Miss Forrester, that might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me for about 100 years.
Professor Forrester. So you came here 100 years ago, but not as a colonist, then why?
By accident. Something drew my ship to Verdana, a kind of psychic force. Never got a chance to find out what, because as soon as we arrived, so did the Krynoids, and it all kicked off.
You say we, you didn't come alone.
I had a friend with me. Have a friend. Livchenka.
What happened to her?
I don't know. And right now I'm better off not knowing, because that means there's a chance I might be able to save her.
I don't want to think it's super cynical. Like, we got to get Paul McGann on the cover of the Planet Krynoid box set, otherwise how else would they know it's a Doctor Who box set? But that kind of feels like how his role in this box set played out. I don't know, there might have been a better way to do it, to have that cameo in there that, maybe he has left a video message from 100 years ago or something, as opposed to being a proper, actual presence in the story, because now that he's there, a lot of the tension kind of goes out of the window, and because this wants to be a more mature and violent spin-off box set, it requires him to, once again, act a bit out of character, sacrificing people, letting people die in ways that I think the Doctor should put up more of a fight against. However, part 3, it does start picking back up again, and this kind of feels like the true pilot, kind of like episode 1 of HBO's The Last of Us, where we see the downfall of this society. Sunlight and Sunset have been putting the pieces in place, but then in Darkness by Chris Chapman, that that's when the wheels truly come off and the crinoid infection starts hitting the broader population in a way that I thought was really, really novel for the audio medium. I can't really spoil it, but there's a cliffhanger ending to Sunset which leads into Darkness, which isn't like a full-blown status quo for the future, but it's like, okay, this is what the civilians of Sunlight have to deal with. This is the circumstances they find themselves in, this sort of hindrance to their physical abilities in order to fight the crinoids, which I thought worked really well in the audio medium. And you can sort of like imagine yourself in this scenario. It's like, how would you do in a zombie apocalypse? Okay, here's an extra element which incapacitates you further. Now what would you do? And I thought that was a great hook, especially in audio. But one element that does hold part 3 back slightly is that while society is falling apart, one character extols the lost potential of Sunlight because of how great they say that the people are, but because the cast has been so focused on just these 2 strands of Hoden in the atrium and Maggie in the slums, and we don't really see much beyond that, it doesn't really ring true. We don't really get to know any other people on planet Crinoid, which is a bit of a shame. I don't know, maybe they could have added a few more characters, like Maggie's got a neighbor, or maybe some people down the street from them. I don't know. I think that's the main way to make that plot point sell. But yeah, Planet Crinoid was an effective and gory and creepy opening to a potential new spin-off from Big Finish. We don't have any future installments announced. I'm assuming they're in the pipeline. Maybe they were waiting to see how Planet Crinoid Nightfall did. I don't think it's quite an opening home run similar to Zygon Century, but Planet Crinoid was still pretty effective. I think if The Seeds of Doom is your favourite story, you should probably pick this up. Like I said, don't go into Planet Crinoid expecting an 8th Doctor adventure, but if zombie apocalypse story set in the future with the Crinoids sounds appealing to you, this box set is for you. But yeah, that's my review of Planet Crinoid Nightfall. What did you folks think of the box set? If you've listened to it, are you looking forward to checking out more in the Planet Crinoid story? What do you think of Seeds of Doom? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe for more Big Finish reviews, hit the like button, and folks, I'll see you all next time.